Good evening. I'm David Levine. I'm co-chairman of Science Writers in New York. My co-chair, Joe Bonner, is behind the scenes. He's taping this and showing it in real time. And my guest tonight is Susan Shapiro, who's a friend of mine. She's the best-selling author or co-author of 15 books that she claims her family hates. I don't know if that's true.
That's fact checkable, David.
It's fact checkable.
Yeah, I can give you 20 relatives emails and they'll say we hate them.
5 Men Who Broke My Heart, Lighting Up, Unhooked, The Bosnia List, The Writing Guide, The Byline Bible, and her recent memoir, The Forgiveness Tour. She lives with her scriptwriter husband in Greenwich Village, where she's taught her popular Instant Gratification Takes Too Long courses at the New York New School, NYU, Columbia University, and in private classes and seminars, and now mostly online. You can follow her on Twitter at susanshapiro.net, Instagram at Professor Sue123, or you can even email her and you'll find out all that information on our website. So for those listening in, I thank you for listening in. If you have a question for Sue, put it in the Q&A box and I will read it. Please don't put it in the chat box, because that's just for Sue and I if we having technical difficulties or
anybody can email me. I have my computer, so if you want to make a comment, I'll read it on my own computer too.
Yeah, that we can do too. And some people put, when they registered, had the opportunity to put questions in advance.
Cool.
So so tell me, when did you start offering your courses and why?
Okay, so I studied undergrad at the University of Michigan as an English major, and then I did my master's degree at NYU studying writing. And I realized I'd spent thousands and thousands of dollars for 2 creative writing degrees, and I came out not even knowing how to write a cover letter to send out any of the work that I'd spent 6 or 7 years perfecting, which was kind of frustrating. And where do you go to learn all this information? And I didn't know. And a professor helped me get a job at the New Yorker. And it really took me about 10 years from when I got to New York to put together, what is an article? What is an essay? Who wants to review? Who wants a pitch? What's an op-ed? And it just took me so long. And I started this writing group in the 80s, actually, with a lot of older writers and editors and critics who just gave me all this information, and there's just no place in the world to find this information. So when the new school finally asked me if I wanted to teach a class for them, I said, I don't really want to do poetry 101, fiction 101, journalism 101. And I told them the reason why. I said, but I have some ideas of a class that nobody offers that I really would like to offer. And at the time I called it, I stole it from Carrie Fisher's The Problem with Instant Gratification is It Takes Too Long. So I called the method, the Instant Gratification Takes Too Long method, where the goal of my classes and seminars was to publish a great piece. And it was kind of, they say that you're supposed to write the book you wanted to read and teach the class you wanted to take. So that was the class I needed to take. And Byline Bible is the book I needed to read because I needed somebody to explain it to me. And the minute I started, David, it was, literally, I think in the first class out of 12 people, 8 got published, 4 got $1,000 or more, and I was like off to the races. It was amazing.
Okay. So, I write articles, and I think that sometimes they're great ideas. Sometimes a lot of times my editors don't even answer, even those who know me and like me, and sometimes they just say, I'm going to pass. And so you have to, I just tell people you have to be used to that, and not take it personal. But it's hard. How do people deal with rejection? Because you do get rejected as a writer a lot.
Okay. First off, I've had great therapy, and I'm a shrinkaholic. So I absolutely recommend that because it is a frustrating field. Although truthfully, all artistic fields are hard to make a living, and all exciting fields are very competitive. So every different field has their own issues and obstacles that you have to go through. So therapy definitely helped me. I'll tell you what I think helps students a lot. I think taking classes, being in a writing program or taking classes helps because you have a community And for example, the writing group that I started, we all started giving each other names and emails. And by the first year, we were all getting published in the New York Times and the New Yorker and Wall Street Journal and New York Magazine. We were helping each other. So I think classes and writing programs helps. I think writing workshops, which you could start yourself. These days, there's a lot of cool stuff going on online. It's so funny. So many of my young students make fun of Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and say it's for old people. Well, there's a lot of old people that are editors and agents that are posting calls for pitches, and this is what I need, and manuscript wish lists. Literary agents are going on and being really, really specific about exactly what they need. So I find that there's a lot of ways to find information like that. Colleagues, mentorships. So it definitely took me a while to figure it out. Also a full-time job, if there's any way that you could get a full-time job at a newspaper, magazine, or literary journal, then you're automatically connected. So it took a while to figure out, but there's a lot of ways you could do it. And when I teach my classes, I definitely encourage everyone. I have a Facebook group. Let's share the work. What's the name of the editor? How much are they paying? All the Twitter calls for pitches we put on there. I have as many as 15 editors and agents who will Zoom into my 5-week classes because I want to keep up with what's going on because it changes so quickly. I'll answer everybody's emails as a karma thing. So, because I have to cold call so many people. So if anybody has any questions, if they email me at night, I'll email them back, propsue123@gmail.com, so you could reach out and ask people. So there's a lot of ways to do it. I don't think getting published is difficult. I think that there's 1,000 little stupid factoids you have to know or understand that are constantly being updated. So I think there's ways to get plugged in, which will help you.
Okay, so one thing I know, you've written about your personal experiences. I've written about my personal experiences. A lot of family, they don't like that. I interviewed Dan Harris and Scott Stossel wrote, at the 92nd Street Y, and they talked about their books, and they said their mother was saying, please don't publish this. Don't embarrass us. You're going to get fired, and nothing like that happened. People, I still get queries from articles I've written years ago. So, I read your article and I could use your help. So it can be very gratifying to write about yourself, but also a lot of people are not comfortable doing that.
Well, there's this comes up a lot. And first, my bio now says Susan Shapiro is the author / co-author of 17 books her family hates. So I kind of own it. And I actually have a rule with my students, which is the first piece you write that your family hates, that you found your voice. And I had a great shrink appointment where my therapist had me write down this to tell my parents that they could appreciate the accomplishment of my publishing a book without loving the book, because of course I've done a whole bunch of memoirs. So I read it to my family and eventually they learned how to say, we're proud of your accomplishment. But there's also rules attached. Like just for an example, one of my rules with first person writing is you have to question, challenge, out, and trash yourself more than anybody else. And that's a big mistake people make. Nobody wants revenge porn. Like if you're just writing a piece because you want to write about your sucky boss or your horrible mother or your horrible ex, or your mean siblings, nobody wants to publish that piece. And actually, they won't publish it because, if other people are litigious, nobody wants to get sued. So there's actually almost like a formulaic way to write good first person writing. And I have a whole chapter on it for the Byline Bible, because the first assignment I give my classes is write about your most humiliating secret. And part of the reason that works is because it's self-deprecating. So it's not trash the person who hates you most who you hate most in the world. That's not going to be a good piece. Your most humiliating secret, that could be a good piece. There's also ways that you could tone it down. So for example, I did a New York Times Modern Love about an ex-boyfriend, and I took out his name, where he lives, what his profession is, how many kids he had. I took out a lot of information so that he wasn't really that identifiable. So there's all kinds of things you could do. I also suggest say something wonderful about the person. If you start out by saying how handsome or slender or brilliant or amazing somebody is, they're much less likely to sue. And if they sue you, they have to prove that you lied with malice intended and show damages. So if you've called them handsome and brilliant, even if that was just your first impression and they later proved you wrong, it's much harder for them to prove malice. So there's actually techniques so that you could avoid getting in trouble with people, but also write what you want to write.
All right, so if you have questions for her, please put in the Q&A box. I appreciate your comments that you're enjoying this, but that's not a question. So I like to read questions. I'm very glad that people are enjoying it. It thrills me. So I have a question. So, people said, how did I first get published? And I said, I would write to editors, said, well, how do you find editors' names? And I said, well, I wrote for Good Housekeeping. I bought the magazine. I looked at the editors' names. Then how do you find how to write to them? And so you have to do some work. It doesn't,
Yes and no. Yes and no. You have to do some work, but there's shortcuts. So for example, like you said, there's masthead. So if you want to write for Salon, Google editor masthead Salon, and every single editor will come up, and it'll say book editor, culture editor, news editor. So a lot of publications have that, and I have students that have been able to find those for every newspaper and magazine in the country. So first you can look at mastheads. That's one way to do it. Second of all, again, this is a great reason why you should take a class, be in a writing program, have a writing workshop. There are so many, as much as people make fun of Facebook, there are so many great writers groups and resources on Facebook where someone will just say, what's the name of the Washington Post parenting editor? And someone else will say, here it is, use my name. So there's all kinds of groups that you could find that out. Here's another trick that people don't realize. You could pick up the phone and call the New York Times and say, could I please have the number of the op-ed editor? And you know what else? You could Google and you could say New York Times opinion editor, and it'll come up in 1 minute, and half of the time so will her email. You could look it up on Twitter. Twitter pitches often have a lot of editors say, pitch me at, and they give you their information. Here's another trick. If you buy Byline Bible, if you read the cover, you have the name of the my New York Times editor and a great foreword he wrote. So on one hand, yes, you have to do some legwork, but on the other hand, it's not really as hard as some people make it out to be, because if you really take 15 minutes or ask a mentor or ask a teacher or ask a colleague or a friend, not that hard to find. Like I could probably find the name of any editor in the country in 6 minutes.
Okay, but it doesn't mean that you're not the only person pitching them.
But I'm helping but I have thousands of former students who are asking me in a nice way, and I'm sharing the email, and I'm on a binders group where I see hundreds of emails, and I'm on Twitter and I'm seeing editors who have 10,000 followers saying, hey, I just saw one from New Republic. Hey, I need op-eds. I emailed her immediately, said, come talk to my class. I have great op-ed writers. So, they're really, it's not as hard to find as you think, and people aren't really paying attention to the easy ways there is to find it. So if you're not Googling the publication and saying, editor masthead, if you haven't done that, do that first.
I think you should also know the publication.
Of course, you should read a publication that you want to write for. Absolutely. Absolutely, 100%.
People send photos to the New Yorker. They don't publish photos. Field and Stream is not looking for a sensitive story about your last love. So you kind of have to know the magazines.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. You have to, you should be reading the publication and paying attention. Also pay attention to what's written by a staff writer, what's written by freelancers.
Okay, and so you have an idea for a story. How do you pitch it to an editor? How do you introduce yourself?
Well, there's several ways to get published. And in Byline Bible, I have the first way that I think is the easiest to get published if you have no clips is to write an entire piece for an essay column, for example, New York Times Modern Love, or an op-ed page, for example, the Washington Post op-ed or the Wall Street Journal op-ed. So you write the entire piece, and the Wall Street Journal, for example, the editor that I work with likes 500-word pieces. So we're only talking 2 or 3 pages. And the Modern Love, if you Google Modern Love, it comes up, there's a million different helpful hints of how to write for Modern Love, which is a 1,500-word essay, and there's tiny love stories. So the easiest way to get published, I think, if you have no clips, is to write an entire piece that fits the tone of the column in the publication that you're aiming for. And in terms of op-eds, they tend to be timely. And also, the reason why I give the assignment, write about your most humiliating secret, is because they want unusual things. So no editor wants a piece on war sucks, the pandemic is stressful, you know, public schools need money. Like if it's something we already know, my boyfriend broke up with me, I'm depressed, you know, so I think editors tend to want, from freelancers, they want unusual, weird, wild, crazy, provocative stories that they can't necessarily get elsewhere, and also provocative opinions. So I think a big mistake people make is they have sort of a milquetoast, boring idea, or like a typical essay, you know, how cute my kids and grandkids are, how I love gardening, and they're not really even understanding what editors want. And I would say that first person writing, including essays and op-ed pieces, is fueled by drama, conflict, tension, and also timeliness, what's going on in the news.
Well, I also, you know, a lot of scientists asked me about getting published, and I said, first of all, they have an advantage because they have an expertise, and they can offer, that can be offered to an editor saying, I would like to write about vaccines.
Right, except for they would have to have something unusual about vaccines. I'll just give you an example. One of my students wrote a piece, Washington Post, she pitched a fact-based piece for their health section, which was about how she could not take the vaccine because of medical problems she had, but everybody assumed she was, you know, an anti-vax, Trump-loving crazy. And so she wrote a great piece about the 6 or 7 categories of people who cannot get the vaccine, even though they want it. That was a perfect piece for the Washington Post. So even if you have a PhD, you have to pitch an editor something that they don't know already or they don't have. So that's hard to do sometimes. I always think if there's like a new study that comes out, that's a good way to do it. And I hate to say it because it sounds silly and reductive, but if something happens with somebody famous, you know, so for example, when Robin Williams was diagnosed with body Lewy dementia, I saw 20 pieces on that, including a couple colleagues who were able to write about it. So if you read newspapers and studies and you follow the news, that makes it more likely that you'll be able to jump in with something new.
Well, whenever I heard, when I worked for the American Cancer Society and a celebrity got ill, I got a million calls saying they wanted, you know, they wanted to know from everywhere, every TV show, Good Morning America to New York Times, saying, I want to interview someone who has it, and I want to interview an expert who has it.
Exactly. Which is another reason why I read 5 newspapers a day. You know, so read newspapers, read what's going on in the world.
Which ones do you read? Which ones do you read?
I read, because I'm a New Yorker and I've written for them all, I read New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Daily News, Newsday, and the New York Post. And then I also read the Washington Post because I've written for them. And they have, the Washington Post is really fabulous right now in terms of essays. They have like 20 different columns for personal essays and op-eds, which is very exciting. A lot of my students have broken in there.
And also, you can also break in, like the New Yorker has an online publication, which is a lot easier to break into than getting published in the magazine.
Yes, it is.
Okay. And do you recommend that to people?
Sure. And in my classes, in my 5-week classes, I have 15 editors who come to speak, and I have a bunch of editors who I love who come from the New Yorker Online, and I've written for Shouts and Murmurs, and I have someone from Page Turner, and I had a student who broke into their science technology section, and it led to a book. Yeah, so the New Yorker Online is a great place to be looking at. And the New York Times has a lot of sections. The Wall Street Journal has a lot of sections open to freelancers. The Washington Post is really amazing right now with first person essays. New York Magazine, Wired, there's, you know, really, I mean, so I have 15 editors who come to each of my classes, and I think they all wind up buying work for my students. And some of my students, I have a very wide range. I had a 17-year-old student in high school who recently got published in the Times in one session, got in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and Washington Post, and it helped him get a free ride to Stanford. So this works. And then I have, you know, older people who are retired, and I have people who have books out but who want to do short pieces. So really across the board, freelancing is absolutely viable. It just takes a while. And as I said, there's a lot of quirky factoids that one has to figure out.
I think you also have to be, you know, be honest and say, you know, am I a good writer? And also you have to be able to, I mean, one other told me the most important thing is to make, if I have a deadline, make it.
That's true, but I would argue that Okay, so I once had a New York Times Magazine editor who'd been at the magazine for 50 years come to speak to my class, and he had worked with every famous writer there was, starting with Norman Mailer. I mean, he just knew everybody, and he gave a lot of people their start. And my students said, so are the people who got the most well-known and did the best writers? And he's like, nope, it was the people who were the most obsessed. And I will argue that I have had students who I would say writing wasn't their background, and maybe I didn't necessarily think stylistically they were the most talented, but if you come up with an idea that's new and fresh and provocative that an editor wants, they'll take it. I once had a New Yorker editor, talk to the town editor, come to my class, and she told a story. Everybody thinks you need to have all this great experience to get into the New Yorker, but she said, what you don't realize is we're looking for breaking news. And she told a story about how there was a guy who hardly had any clips who was walking down the street, and he found all these pages that were supposed to be destroyed from Bertie Madoff, but you could still read part of them. So he emailed the New Yorker and he said, hey, I'm interested in writing an article. The next day he was in the office, and within 24 hours, they helped him write the piece. So if you have a good enough story, an editor will jump in and help you write it, because if it's newsworthy and they don't have it, that's actually, most editors I know, they would prefer a weird, provocative, interesting, unusual story that nobody else has to a gorgeously written piece that basically everybody already knows the story. So that's a misconception that people have. Yes, you have to write clearly and obviously get your facts right and hand it in on time. On the other hand, some people overthink and stress out stylistically, but if you don't have the story, it might not sell.
I know that if you're a photographer and you got that one picture, like the person who got the picture of John Lennon signing the autograph, giving his autograph to Mark David Chapman, he walked that into the Daily News and sold it.
Well, just for an example, I have a student who interviewed Prince the day that Prince died. He had a story about spending a couple hours with Prince, published in the Rolling Stone in 10 minutes. So again, it's a matter of paying attention to the news. I think really, really helps you a lot. But also, you definitely want to think like, what do I have to add to the story that hasn't been said yet? And write the story that only you could write. And if a lot of other people could write it, they will. The staff writers will get it.
Okay, so I'm going to read some of the questions. First, I'm going to read some questions. So one is, how do you know whether you've chosen a viable topic for a book?
Great question. So I'm doing a 5-week book class right now. And I bring in editors and agents, and we analyze book ideas. So the first thing you want to do, which is pretty much similar to what you said with freelance writing, is you want to see what's already out there. So you want to read, for a newspaper magazine, you want to read the publication and you want to see what's already been written on your topic. Exact same thing with a book. So for example, I get a lot of students who say, I have this great idea for a new book. I want to write about how I quit drinking for 3 weeks. And I'm like, and I'll say, okay, there's a lot of addiction memoirs out there, but are you aware that there are 25 bestsellers in the last 25 years about people who quit alcohol? Go check out some of those and then tell me an angle where you could fit in. And for example, when I wanted to write an addiction memoir, I went to the bookstores, I Googled, I went to Goodreads, I went to Amazon, and I noticed that there were several kinds of addiction books that were very successful, which is how to quit alcohol, how to quit crack cocaine, how to quit heroin. There were no first-person funny books or interesting books about how to get off cigarettes or how to get off marijuana. So I thought, aha, I had a lot of addictions. And so I focused on the 2 addictions that I hadn't seen out there. And I pitched a book called Lighting Up, How I Stopped Smoking, Drinking, and Everything Else I Loved in Life Except Sex. But lighting up, the cigarettes and the pot that's what I pitched, because that's what had not been done. And that sold to Random House. So it's similar. So you see what's out there. So for example, if you want to do a biography, say, I want to do a biography of Lyndon Johnson. Well, you better know that Robert Caro has already beat you to it by 100,000 pages, and the chances are it's not going to happen. On the other hand, if there's somebody well-known, like a former student, Kavita Das, she knew of an Indian singer and there'd never been a biography of her, and she was able to publish that. So the first thing you do is you research your topic and you see what's already out there. And then you see if there's room for you to add something to the conversation. That's the first step. And then you have to see, do I have a platform that fits this? Now, platform doesn't mean a PhD. For example, the fact that I was a chain smoking, drunk, drug addict is all I needed to write 4 addiction books. So, your platform just has to fit what you're trying to write, but you definitely need that platform.
So here's a person who said, I'm getting you're a very strong writer, and this is a well-crafted essay, but it's not a fit. Is it a numbers game at this point?
Truthfully, I'll tell you, that happens a lot. And I think what happens is, I think editors and agents have to fall in love with the material. So even if you have something that's good, or it's an A paper, that doesn't mean people are going to fall in love with it. So every time somebody says, see, it doesn't work, I have these editors, all editors say, look what I wrote, it's so smart, they're not taking it. I read it, it's really boring. Or I've read this point of view before. Or it's well written, but there's no surprise at the end. Or you're not adding to a current conversation. It was a conversation that was happening 3 months ago. So basically, I don't think I've ever seen a piece that I can't make better. And I feel the same thing. I have 2 really tough writing groups, and I pay ghost editors to go over my work and kill it. And so I always think writing could be made better. And I think, a very essential step, and I write about it in Byline Bible, is, okay, so you could find the right editor, you could read the publication, you could find an idea that's perfect for your platform. The step before sending it in, for me, is you need criticism. You need a tough critic who's going to tell you the truth. Now, that could be a colleague who's written the kind of stuff that you've written. It could be a teacher for a class, and I'm a really tough critic. It could be a writing workshop. It could be a family member who has expertise. I mean, but if there's anyone in your life who could read it and say, boy, you're so brilliant, show it to somebody else. So you need to find a way to get criticism. And again, there's lots of ways to do it. I personally, at a certain point, started paying ghost editors in the field to kick both my short pieces and my books in shape.
What is a ghost editor?
A ghost editor is somebody behind the scenes who you could pay to line edit your work and give you criticism and tell you how to make it better. And if anyone wants recommendations, if you email me at profsue123@gmail.com, I recommend, there's ghost editors in every field. And I only work with people who are experts in certain, for example, I just recently did a book, World in Between, which was based on a true story of a Bosnian war survivor. And it was a middle grade novel. So I went to a former student of mine, Abby Scher, who's published brilliant YA and middle grade novels, and I paid her. So you only go to someone who has that expertise. And by the way, it's the same reason why, if you take a class, Google the teacher's bio and find out if the teacher has published similar work. Do you admire their work, and are they a good critic? And if they are, take that class. In fact, I had teachers who were really good critics and improved my work. I would stay with them for years, because it's so hard to find someone that, that gets you and that can make you better.
Okay, so after you've submitted, how aggressive should you be about follow-up?
Some editors don't want any follow-ups. For example, the New York Times Modern Love, no follow-ups. Do not follow up. We're not interested. If we want it, we will, we'll say yes or no, but it could take them 8 months. So you don't follow up with them. Some editors say,
how do you know they got it?
Actually, if you send it into Modern Love, there's a bounce back that says we received it.
Okay.
And they do try to answer everyone, but it might take 8 months. I would say that most editors that I know say it's absolutely okay to follow up after a couple weeks, very politely, not entitled, not did you read it yet? Did you read it yet? In Byline Bible, I have a whole section of the art of the follow-up. There's a way to follow up and make people love you and make it more likely that they'll buy your work. And there's a way to follow up where they'll just delete it and they won't want to work with you. So there's an art to following up, just for some, it's a long chapter, but just for an example, I Google the editor, and I mentioned something the editor has just written or ran, and say, hey, I love that. That was so great. By the way, wondered if you had a chance to take a look at my piece. I say the title again. I attach it and paste it below again. I try to make it even more timely. Sometimes I'll say, hey, this front page news just made this more timely. Here's the new lead. Try it that way. I try it with a different subject heading to get their attention. And if I follow up a few times and I don't hear back, then I just move on.
Okay. Can you please spell out the website you mentioned to search for editors? Mestat or MyStat? What was the website?
Oh, manuscript wish list is that's the website where a lot of agents and some book editors go on and tell you exactly what they are looking for, manuscript wish list.
Okay. Let me see. Do you work with novelists and poets?
I do. In fact, I have 4 novels out myself. The joke with my family is that my nonfiction's better than my fiction, and my family says my nonfiction is fiction, but I have published 4 novels, most recently with Houghton Mifflin and St. Martin's. And I have a very bad book of poetry out from my MFA program. And I intentionally bring in editors to my my book class. I have one starting Wednesday, actually. I bring in editors who cover all different genres. And my upcoming book, which is called The Book Bible, How to Sell Your Manuscript No Matter What Genre Without Going Broke or Insane. I have a whole chapter on adult novels, YA, MG, poetry, and I give an early copy out to my students in case there's anything that could help them. So yes, so we do every genre in the book class, and I try to bring in agents and editors who can speak to each one, because each one has their own little weird story. And I'll tell you something else, that I wrote a piece called genre fluidity, which is one of the tricks that I found, is sometimes I would write a book, I thought it was a memoir and it didn't sell, or I tried to make a novel and it didn't work. So by getting great feedback, I quite often, almost every book I had, I was willing to compromise and change genres. And by doing that, I was then able to sell it, and sometimes way bigger. So I can also teach people how to do that. I have a good eye now, since I have 17 books out in 8 different genres. I used to think that that made me like a literary dabbler who nobody would pay attention to, but it's good for one thing, which is when I teach my book class, I know the differences between genres. So I'll give you a perfect example. A lot of people right now are trying to sell memoirs, and memoirs are hard to sell right now, especially if it's not dramatic. If it's like I had a couple fucked up relationships and then I did a couple drugs and, then I was depressed, those are really hard to sell right now. And even the Me Too ones are hard to sell. But I will say that I've had several students who have been able to take their memoir and turn it into a first-person self-help book. And one of them actually got a 6-figure deal from Random House doing it that way. And also, I did this, and a few other people I know have done this, whereas if you have a non-dramatic story, but you're in love with it, if you could fictionalize it and make it more dramatic, maybe you could sell it as a novel. And if the main action takes place when the protagonist is 12 or 15 or 17, it's much easier to sell a YA or a middle grade book right this minute than it is an adult book. So basically, you want a mentor, you want somebody who has a good overview of the publishing world, who can give you some ideas. So you don't really just want someone that's going to say, no, that doesn't work. You want to say, what about this? This is really strong. So why don't you try to focus on this and revise it? Which is one of the things I love to do with students, because just because it doesn't fit one genre or one column or one editor, one agent, doesn't mean you can't, revise it.
Okay, someone said, why waste your time writing an article a person may not want? Just write the pitch and wait with the commission.
Well, just for an example, I wrote a whole piece for the New York Times Magazine that I got $1,000 for, and then I got $100,000 advance from Random House for a fantastic book. If I would have pitched it, they would have said, we don't take pitches. That's why. And by the way, there are 65 books that have been launched from the New York Times Modern Love column. I think 5 or 6 are from students of mine. They don't take a pitch. Most brilliant pitch in the world, they won't take it. It's 1,500 words. So there are columns that, like I said, New York Times Modern Love, New York Times Opinion, Washington Post Opinion, Wall Street Journal Opinion. They will, if they know you well, if an editor knows you well, you could pitch it. But if you're just starting out and they don't know your work, you have to write the whole piece. So sometimes you get your best work that way, and you learn how to write, and it's absolutely worth it.
You've never been published before. Is it better starting to aim for a lesser known publication than try for the New York Times, Washington Post, or Wall Street Journal?
Certainly easier. It's going to be certainly easier to get into smaller publications, and the bigger the publication, the more they pay, the more competition you're going to have. That doesn't mean you can't. Like I said, I had a former student, Isaac Lozano, who was 17 years old, and within a year, his senior year of high school, got in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and several other publications. He happened to have a very good platform, and he was a great writer. So he was 17-year-old Latino living in California who was having a lot of trouble with remote learning, and he just lost a relative to COVID. And he just had a very strong opinion and perception about how remote learning was hurting low-income people of color. And that was exactly what editors were interested in during the pandemic. So, it depends on everything. It depends on, do you have a great idea? Is it timely? Are you reading the publication? Is it a platform people are interested in? And by the way, I'm like an old white boring married person, so it's not as if you have to, you don't have to be young, you don't have to be multicultural, you don't have to have a PhD, but you do have to read the publications carefully and really figure out what you have to offer an editor or an agent that everybody else doesn't.
So the book I'm writing is a book of strategy about dealing with Alzheimer's. It's based on 13 years of caring for my mother, who had Alzheimer's. The title of the book is 25 Ways to Be Happy with Alzheimer's. How do I get this book published?
Well, truthfully, you should take my 5-week class. Number one, starts Wednesday. Number two, second thing you want to do is you want to see what's already out there, because there are many, many, many books out there. And unfortunately, a lot of them are written by doctors, maybe doctors who have Alzheimer's in their family. So there's a lot of competition. So you want to see what's out there. And then you want to, one of the things I say in Byline Bible is the best way to launch a book is to write a fantastic short piece and sell it to a splashy place. And in Byline Bible, I list 27 short pieces that led to books, including the one that I just mentioned of my own. And there's about 6 that's happened recently, where I had one student who wrote a great piece, got in the New York Times, 6-figure Random House deal within 2 weeks. So one of the great things about learning how to do short pieces is that it could absolutely lead you to a book. I'm not saying every single piece you publish is going to lead to a book, but there are ways that you could make that more likely to happen.
Okay. I've also seen people fall apart writing books, book deals that fall through. It's not an easy thing.
I didn't say writing a book is easy, but I do feel that not only is it doable, I can absolutely help people find a structure that works for them. So for example, I wrote all of my books with a weekly writing group where I was bringing in pages every week and I had support. So that really helped me. I had a therapist. So if I freaked out, I could talk to my therapist. And then when I was all done, I would teach more classes so I could afford to pay a top ghost editor who would then give me notes. So I had a very good system attached. And I think, the most successful writers have a system. So I don't think anybody should sit home alone, write something, decide it's brilliant, and at 4 a.m. send it to the New Yorker. That's not a good system. So I think what you need to do is you want to write something, and then you want to figure out, how do I get criticism for it? Is there a class? Is there a seminar? Is there a ghost editor? Do I have colleagues? Am I on a writing program? Is there a mentor? So you want somebody who's going to be tough and critical to tell you the truth. And then you have to be open to hear it and to revise. And then you send it out and then it works.
Okay, so I went to Johns Hopkins creative writing program, and I found it very helpful because we would read, a page or two of other people's works. And some people would be interested. Some people, they only came there just to hear about what people thought about their work. But I thought that feedback from others is helpful.
I think feedback from others is helpful, but I think that you really, really, really have to be careful who you're listening to. And the biggest mistake that people make is don't listen to people who don't buy, sell, or write well in your genre. Because just for an example, when I was trying to write my first humorous book, 5 Men Who Broke My Heart, a memoir about how I went back to re-meet my top 5 heartbreak of all time to find out what really happened. I had a couple really smart PhD poetry type people that were giving me criticism. You know what? They didn't know anything about the market at all. They might have been brilliant. They might have had Harvard PhDs. They did not write funny memoirs for Random House, which was what I was aiming for. So they were actually screwing me up because they were making me go darker, 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 when the truth is the funny hook is what everybody liked. So eventually what I found, which was fantastic, is a friend recommended a ghost editor who was a former editor at Doubleday who did women's books. And she was the one who gave me the best feedback. And then it sold, and I sold 3 books in a row to the same editor. But so you have to make sure who you're listening to. And just because you're in a writing program or a class, or even just because somebody's published or smart, doesn't mean they know your genre. So I'm very, very particular that I'm making sure that people like, so if I'm asking for criticism for an op-ed, it's either an op-ed editor or someone who's published op-eds that I admire.
Okay, so a little sales opportunity for you. You say you have a class on Wednesday. How do you sign up for it?
Well, email me. So I'm profstu123@gmail.com here. I'm going to put it in the chat. So email me and you tell me about your project, and I could give you a bunch of potential directions.
And this is online, right?
Yes, I'm doing everything online still. I am still online, which I didn't think I was going to like. And it turns out people are getting published more and getting more literary agents and editors online. I think maybe it's because I have editors and agents who can now zoom in from all over the country is one. And the other thing I think is that I think the pandemic, a lot of, and I'm pushing people to write about personal stuff, but I think that made a lot of the stories more dramatic, especially for younger people, because suddenly they were thrown out of dorms, or they were getting sick, or they couldn't get tested, or, all kinds of fascinating things were all of a sudden happening in the lives of ordinary people. And editors really want that voice. They don't only want like New York and LA freelance writers. They want someone in Kentucky who's, in the trenches, whose 7 relatives refuse to get vaxxed, to write about what that feels like. So really, the percentage of people getting published in my classes has been amazing in the past 17 months. So that's it's one small good thing that came out of the pandemic. I think that it's easier. There are more places, and it's easier for non-well-known writers to break into newspapers and magazines.
Okay. So my basic question: How do you stay disciplined to write a book or an article? So what's a day? How do you stay disciplined?
Okay. Well, by the way, it's taken me a long time to figure out the way that I work. And I did therapy, and my shrink actually early on, I couldn't sell a book for 7 years, and I would complain, and my shrink just said to me, "You're never going to sell a book the way you're going, because you're smoking and drinking and doing drugs, and you're ruining your brain cells, and you're not focusing." And I said, "You're crazy. I write for the New York Times and I write for the Washington Post." He said, "You can't sustain a long narrative. You're writing 900-word pieces." And he explained to me how my self-destructive impulses were screwing me up, and he unscrewed me up. And I got a book out of it, Lighting Up. And I actually, at the end of it, I wrote a book with him called Unhooked: How to Quit Anything. So I will say, if you find yourself having a lot of trouble getting published, do something different. So take a new class, take a new seminar, start a new writing group. By the way, if you can't afford any of this, I told you all this stuff online and Facebook and Instagram, it's all free. Go to book events. There's tons of online book events, a lot of events like this. Thank you so much, David, for doing it. Tons of this stuff available. On my website alone, if you guys go to my website and you scroll down the classes events page, there are 20 panels with different editors and agents that I had taped. And you can just watch them all, and you can meet a ton of great editors and agents that way. So I think there's a lot of ways to do it, but I do think the trick is to do something different, pay attention. Maybe you need a new mentor, new teacher, new direction.
Someone wrote, "I live in Australia. Am I less likely to be break into a top US publication because I don't live in the United States?"
I had a student that just took my class, my seminar from Australia Saturday. I have students from all over the world. I do think what I have found with the online classes is that the students in different countries who are getting published in American publications are finding a way to make their pieces relevant to the United States. So for example, a Brazilian, when she wrote a piece about what was going on in Brazil, she compared, independent, Brazil, president. Here it is. She compared Bolsonaro to Trump. And she also talked about how she was in LA and couldn't get to her family in Brazil. So I do think quite often you can't just write a piece about another country and assume that the United States editors and agents are going to be interested. We are very myopic. On the other hand, there are ways to make it fascinating or interesting. Another great example is my former student, Tiffany Drayton, who has a gorgeous book coming out called Black American Refugee. It's about how she left America to go to Trinidad, but when she sold it, where her family's from, based on racism and gentrification, but when she sold it, the focus was on the problems in America that led her to leave. So the focus was, again, American racism, American gentrification, what her family had been through before she left. So, but again, I have students from all different countries that are publishing work. You do have to pay attention to the publication. Or, by the way, I have Israeli students, I send them to the Jerusalem Post, or I have British students I send to the Independent and to, there's great British papers. So you either want to write for your own country, papers, magazines, newspapers, and publishers from your own country, or if you want to break out, you have to find an angle that's going to be of interest to an American audience.
So someone said, what advice do you have for someone who wants to write about their mental health journey, which includes—
By the way, mental health journey, very, very, very hot topic.
Let me finish the question.
Yeah.
Which includes more than one stay in the mental hospital, but still employed full-time. I'm worried that if I write about my experience, it could impact my ability to be hired in the future.
It's a very, very hot topic. There's a million books out there. I have a former student who wrote a fantastic book called Gorilla and the Bird, he was a lawyer who had bipolar illness, and his mother kind of helped save him. I think I heard he's working as a lawyer now. Didn't hurt him at all. He is sold a beautiful book to Little Brown that got raves in the New York Times, and he sold it as a HBO miniseries. So, I mean, it depends what field you're in. There's a lot of options. Some editors will let you change your name. Sometimes you could use a maiden name, or a family name. Sometimes there's a way to write a third person book. There's a way to write a novel. So there's a lot of options, but mental health is a huge, huge arena at this point.
How do you recommend getting your nonfiction work ready for fact checking by an editorial staff?
A book or a magazine or newspaper piece?
Nonfiction work, doesn't say.
Well, again, I have a writing group. I have a fantastic writing group that gives me really tough feedback. I have mentors that I could show it to get good feedback. And also I pay ghost editors. So if I have a big book deal and I'm afraid I'm going to screw it up because it's not in good enough shape, I would rather spend money to pay a ghost editor to kick it into shape to make sure that the book comes out. So those are options.
So someone said, how would you go about getting a translation of a great book published into English from a foreign language?
That would depend on a lot of things. So it would depend on how well it did in the country, if there's a literary agent attached, if there's an editor. Some people, what they do is they translate it and then if they have the rights, like if you're the author, if you translate it into the right language and it's beautiful enough, you could try to sell it that way. It's not easy. And your best bet is going to be to have a literary agent who handled the foreign rights do it. But I've heard of cases where it's happened. You can also approach a good translator, because a good translator might have connections that could get you to the editors and agents that you need to be where you need to be.
Okay. So here's a question I have. Let's say you taught a music class and a guy says, I want to, I'm a trumpeter. And he's terrible. Do you tell him, keep trying? Or and I guess my analogy is some people are not good writers.
Well, but I'll tell you something.
Yeah.
I taught for 25 years. I cannot tell you how many students I had who I didn't think they were good writers, but they came to class, they paid attention, they read the publications, they heard what the editor said, and they got published. And I got to tell you something, some of the most talented people fucked off and never got published because they didn't show up to class. They thought they were too brilliant. You can't change a comma. They weren't willing to compromise.
Okay.
Don't kill my babies. So I would say that I don't think I've ever had a student. Interestingly, I actually have one person in mind who I thought, this person has no talent whatsoever. She got in the Daily News. She just kept trying. She paid attention. She handed it in. She rewrote, got the piece in. So I feel like, commitment and willingness to compromise is a little bit more important, especially for a short piece than, beautiful writing ability. I think it's different if you're writing a poetry book, that's a really different story. But for example, for a short op-ed, an op-ed is not really about how lyrical and beautiful the writing is. An op-ed is about, do you have an interesting, unusual opinion that's really timely, that you could argue, that you could argue well enough. And you don't have to be a good writer to do that. The idea will carry through if you could write it clearly. And again, classes, ghost editors, writing groups. I mean, I've definitely seen people who come up with ideas or come up with a first draft that isn't impressive, but they stay at it and they're able to get it published.
Okay. How many people make a, do you advise people to, it's hard to make a living just writing. So do you advise people to, keep your day job until
I actually do. I actually say to students, even the most talented ones, I highly recommend getting a job at least part-time that'll pay the bills. And the beauty of that is it takes the pressure off of your writing. So you're not trying desperately to finish the writing too quickly to make a living. I've been a teacher now for 25 years and I absolutely love teaching. And I'm at a point where I teach 4 or 5 hours at night. So my entire day, 9 to 5, 7 days a week is free to write. And then I just teach a few hours at night and I absolutely love it. My husband's an NYU professor. He was a TV writer, wrote for 20 great shows, still working on some great projects. But by having the day job that pays our bills, took a lot of stress off. And I've had students who, like me, who teach. And by the way, teaching is a great job. Even an elementary or a high school teacher, a lot of times you get home at 3 or 4 o'clock and you get 3 months off over the summers and you get full benefits. That's a great job. I have students that are dog walkers. I have students that are researchers, proofreading, copy editing, personal assistant, babysitter, anything that you could do that's steady. And I'll tell you an interesting story. So I had a student who's a dog walker and he always wanted, he was more interested in writing and artistic pursuits. And interestingly, he started making 6 figures as a dog walker because he loved dogs and he had a really interesting angle. And then what did he start publishing? He published 10 pieces about being a successful dog walker who makes 6 figures. So interestingly, sometimes the day jobs lead you to a good subject, because no editors really want writing about writing. It's really boring to write about writing, and Stephen King gets to do it and Mary Carr. So in a way, if you have a day job or you have another expertise or some other way that you make your living, that actually gives you a whole other world that you could write about. So it's a good idea for a lot of reasons.
So how many hours a day do you write?
At this stage, and again, I've been through lots of stages. At this stage, I wake up and I write every single day, maybe 5 or 6 hours a day, depending on if I'm on a deadline or I have a project. And I had a best-selling mentor who once said to me, I complained that I had writer's block. And he said, plumbers don't get plumber's block. Just don't be self-indulgent. Wake up every day and get to work. And then he told me something really interesting. He said, a page a day is a book a year. And that really stayed with me. So ever since then, my goal every day is 250 words. And it doesn't have to be good. It just has to be on the page. And sometimes it's, rewrite something or rewrite this essay, or I have a deadline for my writing group, or my editor says to hand her this chapter. So sometimes I'm not free to do whatever I want, but every single day I try to, give myself an assignment and 250 words. And what I found, which is so interesting, is that 250 words a day is actually more than a book a year because my books are short. So that if you think about it, and it could be journaling, you could do it on a commute. I mean, I have students that are like, well, I have kids or I have a job. You know what? I had a job full time. I would wake up early in the morning. I would do it lunch hour. I would do it during my commute. I would do it late at night. Marie Poncet, who was a poet, she had 7 kids. She used to say, I write in 10-minute increments. And a line that I really like is, successful people will do what other people won't to get ahead. So wake up early, stay up late, have 2 jobs, have 3 jobs, be tired, so there's, yeah. So, I mean, again, I've had a lot of therapy and you're meeting me at a very good place. If you would have met me early on in my career, I might've been depressed and aggravated and stoned and drunk every time I got a rejection. So you're meeting me at a good place because I feel like I figured it out, with a lot of help. with great mentors, with writing programs, with classes, with a good therapist, with a great writing group. Now I feel like I have a good overview of what works.
So we haven't talked about money. So how do you address money? How do you address money with, for your work?
With an editor? Well, most
Yes.
editors, if you send them a piece, they will, after they say yes, whether it's a pitch or a whole piece, they say, oh, yes, we like this. Then you say, oh, great. How much do you pay? When are you going to publish it? Do you need me around for edits? Are you going to show me a version before it runs? So right when they say yes, that's when you ask. Now, there are most publications have a steady amount that they pay. So just for an example, Modern Love right now, they pay $500, and you can't negotiate. You either say yes to $500 or it doesn't happen. So that's really common. So most publications have a set amount that they give. Once in a blue moon, if you're pitching a piece that they really, really want, and they say, okay, we'll give you $500, and you say, you know what, I have to do so much research and travel. Is there any wiggle room? Sometimes they'll kick in and say a little bit higher. But basically, when they say yes, they want the piece of the pitch, then you say how much you're paying. I let them throw out the first number. A lot of places will say, we don't pay. We can't afford to pay. And you could say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know that. I can't do it then. And you take your piece and you give it to someone who pays. One of the things that I do in my classes and my seminars is I ask the editors, how much do you pay? I will say to them, how much do you pay? So that I know that the Huffington Post is going to pay $125 for a piece, or Salon is going to pay $100 for a first piece. So we ask editors, how much do you pay? And, as you would guess, the bigger publications will pay more, so the New Yorker and Vogue and Esquire, especially the hard magazines, they'll pay more. The thing that I would say right this minute is it's harder to make a lot of money doing newspaper magazine work, but books are still happening. And I have quite a few students who've gotten 50,000 as a first advance, and I have a few students who've gotten 500,000. So I would say, if you're thinking about being a writer, maybe don't think in terms of, I'm going to be a freelance journalist. Think bigger, think, is there a book in your future? And my husband teaches TV film, and he has many, many students who are working in TV film. So there's more money in that too. There really is not a lot of money in freelance newspaper magazine work. That's really hard to make a living, but books you can make a living.
Okay. Did you place essays or articles at or near the time of your book launches? If so, did you find the author of the forthcoming book in your byline help you place these essays?
Yes.
What other strategies did you imply in placing these?
Yeah, my last book. Okay, if somebody wants to figure this out. So if you go on my website and you look at my book Forgiveness Tour, I've probably written 25 short pieces about forgiveness and apologies for everywhere to plug my book. So that's once I sold it and it came out. So I would say learning how to write short pieces is one of the great things about it is that it can help you with every stage of publishing a book, from getting the book deal, getting an initial interest from editors and agents, to publicizing it when the book comes out. And what's great is that once you have a book coming out, if you write and publish short pieces, it's still artistic, you're still working, and you're basically getting paid to write your own book publicity. And quite often, if the editors are nice, they will link the book so that people can buy the book from the short piece, which is like a miracle.
Okay. I once turned down a lot of money to write about something going on in my family, and I just felt that was the right thing to do. Is there anything that you will not write about?
Oh yeah, there's tons of things that I won't write about. People think, because I have so many memoirs out, I published like 6 memoirs, a couple co-authored. So people think I've written about everything, but yeah, there's quite a lot of things I won't write about. I mean, I try really hard not to tell other people's secrets. And I try to only, again, question, challenge out, and trash yourself more than anyone else. So I try to stick to my own life and my own story if possible. And when it comes to opinions, I try to stick to, my platform. So yeah, there are things that I wouldn't write because I wouldn't want to hurt somebody, or it's not my story to tell. On the other hand, I also have 4 novels out. So I feel like if I don't write about something in nonfiction, sometimes I could disguise it and write about it in fiction, which is fun.
Okay. Tell us about the apology book.
Forgiveness Tour. So that book actually took 10 years to write. So that book was a headache. Some books are fast. That one was slow. So basically, I felt betrayed by somebody very close to me who refused to apologize. And it turns out I'm the kind of person that could forgive anybody, anything, as long as they say I'm sorry. But if they don't acknowledge what they did, I can't forgive them. And this was a big problem because this was someone who'd been very important and kind to me for 15 years. And I didn't know how to deal with it. And I wound up, I was teaching at Holy Apostle Soup Kitchen. So I asked this reverend I was working with about, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do, and forgiveness in Christianity. And then I wound up going to my rabbis. And anyway, I wound up spending 10 years researching the ideas of forgiveness and apologies. And what's really cool is that it came out to great reviews. So it only sold to a small house, and it was a little bit of a difficult sell, but I'm really happy that I stayed with it. And in the meantime, I did more fun books. Like I did a pop culture history of Barbie, which took 6 months, So I did easier books in between, but that one I couldn't let go of.
Well, sometimes something that, it takes 10 years can be very important to, it's worth the wait sometimes.
It is. And sometimes books take a long time. And on the other hand, there are certain books that one can write easily. So sometimes when people take my book class, they could throw out 3 different ideas and we could talk about what's your goal. And some books you do for love and the amount of time it takes and the little amount of money doesn't matter. And sometimes you could just make a killing off of a book really quickly, or co-authoring a book or ghostwriting a book or something like that. So yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that a mentor told me a long time ago was that you can write a bunch of different kinds of pieces for different publications and different money and different books. You don't have to have a standard. It doesn't have to be just because the last piece I wrote, I made $1,000. Doesn't matter. You can do a $50 piece tomorrow if you feel like it. So one of the cool things about a freelance writing career is that you can mix and match. You can change your mind. You could switch genres. I've written 8 different genres. And by the way, part of it is because my memoirs weren't selling anymore. They weren't selling a lot of copies. So nobody wanted another one. So I thought, all right, let me try fiction. And here's a trick. If your book in a certain genre doesn't sell, they don't want it anymore. But if you switch genres, all of a sudden they're like, they can project that you'll sell more in this other genre. And when that didn't happen, I started doing co-authored books. So again, I've had a lot of therapy to reinvent myself, which is something that I think writers have to do a lot. But I also think there's something called a change agent. So if you're not doing well, if you're in a slump, take a new class, find a new mentor, do a new writing group. If you can't afford it, then just go to like a bunch of book events, like allow yourself to, well, they say you meet the mentor that you're ready for. So if you're open-minded, a lot of times you could find a person, an editor, an agent, a colleague that'll help you break through.
I also tell people that sometimes, you might get more money somewhere else, but sometimes you write something and it will lead to other things. Sometimes, even if you write it for
all the
free.
time. In fact, I'll tell you a weird story. So I think it's students have sold 160 books in the last decade. And one of the weird things I noticed was a lot of them, after they would sell their book, they would get married or have a kid. And some of them had been single for years and said, I can't meet someone, but there's something about the accomplishment of publishing a book. I don't know if it's maybe they go out into the world more because you have to publicize it and they meet more people, or they feel a sense of accomplishment, or maybe more people are attracted to you because you're a star when you publish a book. But it's happened so many times, which is kind of fascinating. And the same thing has happened actually with people who've taken my classes who get published in like Wall Street Journal, New York Times, New Yorker, New York Magazine. Sometimes it just opens up a door because you just see what you're capable of and it gives you more power. So it could be very magic.
Yeah. So if someone wants to know, how much time per day do you allocate for exercise and work-life balance activities? Do you use a standing desk or shift to work?
Yeah, truthfully, I'm a workaholic. And part of the reason is I was writing for 23 years before my first real book came out. 5 Minute broke my heart. And also I had wasted so many years with all that addiction crap that I definitely am making up for lost time still. So I spend most of the day writing. And then I exercise at night. And by the way, one of my favorite things to do is, especially teaching at NYU, the new school in Columbia, is I do walking office hours with students where a student will come speed walk around Washington Square Park with me at night and they could pick my brain. So I actually have a student coming over later tonight. So I love to do that. That's really fun for me. And I have a physical therapist who still comes once a week because I had some injuries, who hilariously, I wrote 2 books with him because physical therapy is so fucking boring that I just started asking him a million questions, and he's a Bosnian War survivor. So that helped. But so I would say, I wake up and I focus on my work as much as I can. Usually about 5 or 6, I teach or do a writing group. And then later I take, an hour speed walk or, do some form of exercise. I love swimming. So I would say, I don't have children, so and my husband's a writer. So I'm lucky in that sense that I can afford to spend this many hours on my writing. But I have tons of students and colleagues who have kids who have still figured out ways to, finish books or publish articles or.
Okay, so I want to thank you for spending time with us. Before you go, I want to plug, next week I'm interviewing Dr. Paul Offit, who, as everyone knows who watches TV, he's on TV all the time. He has a new book out. And then after that, I'm interviewing Wendy Moyer, who wrote a book, How Not to Raise Kids Who Are Assholes. So Dr. Paul.
By the way, so everybody also feel free to email me, especially at night. So my email is profsue123@gmail.com, and I answer all my emails. And most of the stuff I talked about today was in my book, Byline Bible. So check it out. Email me. Thank you so much, David, for having me. Have classes coming up Wednesday and next Monday if anybody wants to jump in.
Okay, how long are the book classes for?
The book classes are 6 to 8 on 5 Wednesday nights. And the other class is a pitch class where I bring in 15 different newspaper magazine editors from New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Daily News, Post. And that is 5 weeks, 6 to 8 on Monday nights. And it's Eastern Standard Time. I have people from Asia that are getting up at 6 in the morning, and I have people from Europe that are staying up until midnight. So I have a very wide range now that it's online. And I don't know next term if I'm going to stay online, but I will say that it's exciting to be able to have so many students from all over.
And the clock changed on Sunday. So.
Oh, thank you for reminding me. I didn't write that down.
Okay, so everyone, again, my friend Susan Shapiro.
Thank you. Yeah, and email me. I promise you I'm going to read all the chats now. I didn't read all the answers in the chat. But so any questions you guys email me, I promise you I'll get back to you.
Okay, and I really want to thank you. We had a great turnout. And on November 9th, I'll be talking to Dr. Paul Offit, who also said he will answer your questions about COVID and the vaccines. Okay, everyone take care, and everyone stay safe. And
Thanks, David.
Thanks again. Good night.
Thank you.